Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the whole concept of stimulus versus fatigue when selecting our movements for overall hypertrophy. Now, this is something that as a novice lifter, you don't need to worry about this. In fact, some of the best movements in novice programs that have given people enormously quick gains through their novice phase tend to be some of the exercises that don't have particularly good stimulus to fatigue ratios. And these are exercises that we tend to move over to max type work later on in your training as you get more advanced. So novices need to remember this doesn't apply to you, that in fact doing the opposite might actually be good. So keeping in mind rules versus guidelines. Okay, this is for non-novices. Novices just worry about getting as much stimulus as you can and recovering from it. As we get more advanced, though, one of the things that we look at is axial loading. And what you guys see me doing at the start of this video is speed pulls. Now, you guys know my max deadlift is past 600. In fact, you guys have seen me do deficit pulls with over 600, which are harder than normal deadlifts even. So this is a lightweight. This is 315 on the bar plus an enormous amount of chains done for compensatory acceleration. All right, when we can reduce axial loading, we're getting a better stimulus to fatigue. This is one reason that so many really advanced strength athletes thrive on speed work. This is why we thrive on speed work, because we can take a lot of these classic movements and we can do them for compensatory acceleration with lighter weight and hit upper threshold fibers on every rep because we do them explosively. Okay? And therefore we reduce the axial loading, and then we can save that for the movements which we really care about, like when we max out, such as max squats, max deadlifts, things like that, so that we're not just hammering our spine with compressive stress all the time in our training, but it still allows us to get benefits of things like a deadlift, because a deadlift hits an enormous amount of muscles. It brings a lot to the table, but I would suggest to people that things like snatch grip deadlifts, which you guys have seen me do in the past, deficit deadlifts, speed pulls for your non-max work probably are going to be a better use of your recovery resources, just because they're easier to recover from, right? The stimulus side versus the fatigue they generate. Now, a lot of people will even bring up, well, maxes generate a lot of fatigue without a lot of stimulus. Well, they do generate a lot of stimulus. A 1-rep max is probably the most stimulating single rep you can do. And they're fatiguing, but they're not fatiguing particularly outside of that, other than the axial loading component. So when it comes to other things, we have to start looking at how much do they beat us up. So in this case, you see me up here again doing very wide grip upright row. Very easy to recover from exercise, very easy on your body, hits an enormous amount of muscle through the shoulder girdle. Hits all three heads of the delts, hits at least the entire upper half of the trap, in addition to a little bit of bicep and brachialis and forearm. Right, though those ladders, although you're probably not getting much in the way of stimulus. But your entire shoulder girdle, it does, and it's easy to recover from. Again, if you get the grip right to where it doesn't beat your joints up. And also notice I'm doing very, very high reps with it. This is one of the benefits we get of a lot of high rep training, is that we can stimulate a lot of hypertrophy without beating ourselves up. And I know that we've got good data showing that heavier weight can build muscle. But the thing I would point out is that if we're already doing really heavy singles, we're not getting real benefits from doing heavy fives anymore. What's the benefit of doing fives instead of 10s or 12s or whatever? What's our benefit? More weight on the bar, more mechanical tension. It yields better strength results per unit of hypertrophy. But it's only because it trains better intramuscular coordination. But if you're already maxing out every week on other lifts, you're not getting that benefit. And I would say even in systems like 5-3-1, where you're still lifting, 5-3, then 1, and you're getting pretty heavy near the end, doing a bunch of supplemental work with lower reps, it beats up your joints. It beats up your recovery for the same amount of stimulus. In terms of actual recovery, very high reps are easier on your recovery. Now, they're harder on the central nervous system, but that's not that big of a deal, meaning, and this is going to really piss people off because they love to say, oh, this lift is hard on central nervous. Lifting isn't hard on your central nervous system. That's a myth, not supported by the research. It's been researched. And even some really good coaches still say that, but it's not based on reality. Higher reps actually cause more CNS fatigue than a 1 rep max does. And that's not my opinion. That's been measured in the lab. So we do get a little more CNS fatigue from these, and their perceived effect is hard. Like in the middle of doing them, very high reps, especially things past 10, especially taking close to failure or to failure, they're very fatiguing in the moment. They feel like they're extremely fatiguing, especially compared to a heavy 5 rep set. Right, a heavy 5 rep set feels heavy and it feels good, but it doesn't feel as fatiguing. And people don't believe me. You're doing it with squats and things, so you're like, oh, well, I don't know. 5 rep squat feels pretty hard. Yeah, because you're doing squats. If you were to do a higher rep on a smaller movement, it would be different. But if you were to take your 5 rep squats up to 12 reps, I think you're going to notice you're getting a lot more fatigue. It feels like it's more work during the session, but afterwards you recover quicker. It doesn't beat your body up as much, mainly because it's not beating up the joints and everything quite as hard. And again, we get enough of that. We get enough of that on the max work. So the other thing that we'll point out with it as far as the recovery goes, people would say, well, what about bone density? Well, if you're getting stronger, your bone density is going to improve. And keeping in mind that a lot of these high rep sets, you're going to get very, very strong eventually. You're eventually going to have a lot of weight on the bar. I mean, for example, you come over and think of the bone density of those speed pulls. Like, that's a light weight for me. But what is it at the lockout? It's still approaching 500 pounds at the lockout, and you're doing that for 10 singles. That's still building up a lot of bone density. It's just that it's easy for my musculature. Okay, same thing with your other speed work. And the same thing with a lot of the supplemental lifts. And the same thing, look at something like a glute ham raise. Look how easy this is in terms of structural loading and recovery. These are very challenging when you do them. They even make your hamstrings cramp afterwards, sometimes for a few minutes. They are an enormous amount of hamstring stimulus and even hip stimulus for me. But you don't feel them the next day usually. Like, you're recovered very, very quickly. Even in this case with me doing on a harder setting, 3 sets of 20 after doing other work, at the moment they felt absurdly fatiguing. But the recovery is very, very fast. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about of picking exercises with a good stimulus to fatigue. A closed grip bench press is going to be better than a bench press. A floor press is going to be better than a bench press. They have a better stimulus to fatigue due to being forced to use slightly lighter weight, different things going on. They're stricter movements. So that's what we're looking at is, are we doing movements that are relatively strict? Are they targeting a lot of muscle hypertrophy, right, without us having to move enormous amounts of weight? And again, enormous amounts of weight is relative. You may get to a point where you're doing high reps with 315 on a closed grip bench. If you're monstrously big, well, that's still a lot of weight. But our stimulus to fatigue is still better than if you went with a wide grip bench using a lot of leg drive, right? You're going to have more weight on the bar usually. Same thing with your floor press, removing that leg drive, that hard stop, maintaining the chest tightness, better stimulus to fatigue. And so we tend to pick things like that, and we pick stricter movements, and we pick movements that are easier for us to recover from for our hypertrophy to gain our extra size. And that matters, guys, because a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, and you cannot escape that. So for guys who are trying to maximize strength, the amount of muscle you have is extremely important. 90% of your strength comes from the muscle mass you have relative to your leverages. That has been studied over and over and over now. We know that. That's not even a disputable point. The rest of it comes from things like your explosiveness, your technique, everything else. Okay, which is important because 10% matters. But your size is going to equal your strength. And it doesn't matter that you know of 1 or 2 small guys out there who lift an enormous amount of weight. Maybe you don't have as much muscle as you think you do in certain areas, and that's why they're beating you. But we're looking at this because we need to stack on muscle. We need to maximize hypertrophy if we want to get strong. And then if you need to make weight class later, you need to get leaner, right? You want to be the most stacked, leanest guy in a weight class if you really want to dominate it. Ideally, you should be an inch shorter than everyone else too, in a perfect world. But we have to do a ton of hypertrophy training in order to maximize our strength, right? We have to. And we have to start looking in terms of things like stimulus versus fatigue, because as we get stronger and stronger, it's very easy to bury yourself with big, heavy movements like squats and deadlifts. It really is. And this is how we get away with it. This is how we do it. We manage our fatigue with our exercise selection and our rep ranges. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.